Black folk have to give their kids the talk. And what's interesting is that no matter what we say to our children, it's not their behavior that generates the outcome.
I've been reading personally a lot about accounts of Black parents sharing their stories of how they talk to their kids about being pulled over by the cops.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same, I deal with racism. I've never had that conversation with my parents, or they never had it with me, and I don't feel particularly concerned about having it with my own kids. Could you shed a little bit of light on how you did that how old were your kids? What did you tell them? What do you tell them now?
There's this kind of approach, what Black folk have to give their kids the talk. And what's interesting is that no matter what we say to our children, it's not their behavior that generates the outcome. It's not whether or not they do it or not that actually matters, right? What is really at issue is what you're saying to your kids. What you're saying to what white people are saying to their children, what they're saying to each other. Not what I'm saying to my kids. Now, whether you put your hands on the wheel or put your wallet there, or you say yes sir or no sir, you can say sir for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and it doesn't matter. We don't have the luxury of innocence. So, Tamir Rice, just an example, didn't have the luxury of innocence, playing, probably imagining, folks that he was about to capture or whomever. No, that was the occasion for his murder. Or you think about some child developing an entrepreneurial spirit and goes out and wants to sell water in the New York subway, and next thing you know, he's handcuffed, right? Because he's trying to sell chocolate bars or something. Innocence is not something that our children have for long. And the talk is part of that socialization, which announces that, as my dad told me when I was 14, you're not cute anymore. And when he said you're not cute anymore, the next sentence was, in their eyes, you're a nigga now.
So can you talk to us a little bit about what is anti-Black violence? What does that look like to you? Is it police brutality? Is it mass incarceration? What else would you like people to think about when they're thinking about anti-Black violence?
America is organized along the lines of what I've called in my earlier work, the value gap. This belief that white people matter more than others. And that belief it shapes all of our social arrangements. So when we talk about anti-Black violence, right, and particularly in the context of police brutality, there are a set of conditions that make that possible. So we might not want to describe it as violent, but we would want to say what happens in American public schools, right? The way in which public education has been defunded, the way in which public schools are funded, the way in which teachers inhabit those spaces, what conditions are being set up there, the way in which the healthcare system reveals deep racial inequities and inequalities. That sets up anti-Black violence. Certain people are valued more because of the color of their skin, and certain people are devalued. And that devaluation makes some of us susceptible to a kind of violence that others aren't.
What it reveals to me about my own thinking is, and I think this is probably true for most Americans, we start learning about race through examples of direct racism as kids, right? Like that's when you learn about Rodney King, or that's when you learn about Trayvon, or Emmett Till, for example. And then, I'm 35 now and learning about systemic violence. And what you're saying, and so in my head, the way that's organized is first you have these direct instances of racism and violence. And then it sort of goes to the top. What you're saying is it actually works the other way around. The whole system has been structured to filter down that way so that it's the organization and then it's the people.
Right. So let's think about this in the context of policing, right? So Derek Chavin's knee on the neck of George Floyd is an extreme consequence of a form of policing that is experienced daily. So if I'm constantly bending on the pen and doing all this, eventually I'm going to break it. What are the conditions that led me to snap it in two, right? What are the conditions that led to, right, an act where you could keep your knee on a man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, right? So, and one of the things that I've been saying is that if you look at the way in which the police responded to the protesters, whether they were white, black, green, purple, or yellow, folks focus on the violence, but they're not focusing on the aggression, the spite, the insult. And what I say is that if you bracket the tear gas and you bracket the rubber bullets, the insult, the aggression, the spite is the way in which our communities are policed daily, right? That every encounter with people, by the way, who have the legitimate use of lethal force, every encounter is overdetermined by the possibility of aggression, right? Or the actuality of aggression, right? And so it is the way in which we police daily that then generates the horrific act. And then in the way in which because we live in never, never land in the United States, we always want to protect our innocence. It's a kind of willful ignorance. When we see the act, we clutch our pearls. But before the act happened, you're defending stop and frisk. You're defending a form of policing that sets the conditions for that to happen. That's the kind of argument I'm trying to make.